A billionaire invites two hungry twin sisters who have been begging to share a meal. But when one of them starts speaking, everyone begins to cry. The sun was beginning to set in Manhattan when Paul Matthews's black Porsche 911 GT3 slowed down. Through the tinted window, something caught the billionaire's eye. Two identical little girls sitting on the sidewalk of a busy street. At 35, the CEO of Tech Vision Industries was used to making decisions that moved millions on the stock market. But the sight of those children alone made him completely forget about the important shareholders' meeting waiting for him. "James, stop the car," he ordered his driver, his eyes fixed on the two little girls in faded floral dresses, their light brown hair messy. Forbes had just updated his fortune to an impressive $8.2 billion. But at that moment, Paul felt all his money would be useless if he couldn't make a real difference in someone's life. Stepping out of the car, his $12,000 Italian suit contrasted sharply with the scene around him. The girls watched him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Up close, he noticed they were completely identical, except for a small birthmark near the right eye of one of them. "Hello," he said, keeping his voice gentle and maintaining a respectful distance. "Are you by yourselves?" The twins exchanged looks, as if silently conversing with each other before responding. "Our mom went to look for work," answered the one with the birthmark. "She told us to wait here." "I'm Sophie," said the other, then pointed to her sister. "And she's Claire." Paul looked around, noticing how the Manhattan sky was starting to darken. "How long have you been waiting?" "Since breakfast," Claire replied, and right then her stomach growled audibly. Paul checked his Patek Philippe. It was already past 6 in the evening. Across the street, the golden lights of McDonald's shone invitingly, and the smell of fries hung in the air. He noticed how the girls would occasionally cast curious glances at the big glowing M. "Have you two ever been to McDonald's?" he asked gently. They both shook their heads. "But we always smell the yummy food when we walk by," Sophie confided, her eyes sparkling as she looked at the restaurant. "The commercials on TV look so cool," Claire added shyly. "The kids there are always smiling." Paul felt his heart tighten. Something as simple as a meal at McDonald's, routine for many, seemed like a distant dream for these two. "What do you think about going there?" he invited, pointing to the restaurant. "We can order hamburgers, fries." The twins' eyes widened in perfect sync. For a moment, they were silent, as though trying to process the possibility of doing something they'd only seen on TV. "Can we get that big burger they always show on TV?" Sophie asked, her voice barely containing her excitement. What's it called, Claire?" "Big Mac," Claire finished, pronouncing the name as if it was something magical. Paul smiled. "Of course. And did you know they also have dessert? A special ice cream called a McFlurry with chocolate bits." "With real chocolate," Sophie interrupted, her eyes now impossibly large. The girls looked at each other again, but this time Paul noticed the barely contained excitement on their faces. Still, there was a trace of hesitation. "Mom told us not to go with strangers," Claire mumbled, though her gaze remained fixed on the bright restaurant. Paul crouched down to their level, keeping a comfortable distance. "You're very smart to be careful. How about this? James, my driver, will go with us. The restaurant is full of families. It's well lit, and you can choose where you want to sit. If at any moment you don't feel comfortable, you can leave. What do you think?" The twins launched into another one of their silent conversations, communicating only through glances and small expressions. Claire's stomach growled again, as if taking part in the decision. "Can we really order anything?" Sophie asked, her voice betraying a mix of hope and disbelief. "Anything on the menu," Paul assured, "and afterwards, if you like, you can play in the playground they have inside." "They have toys," they exclaimed in unison, and for the first time since he'd seen them, Paul witnessed genuine smiles lighting up their faces. They crossed the street together, with James following a few steps behind. Paul watched as the girls seemed more excited with each step, still holding hands but practically skipping in anticipation. Upon entering the restaurant, the smell of freshly fried fries made them pause for a moment, amazed. Their eyes scanned everything, the colorful panels with pictures of meals, the families at the tables, the playground in the back, trays passing by with hamburgers and fries. "Look, Sophie," Claire pointed to a nearby family. "The burger is even bigger than on TV." Paul led them to the counter, lifting them one by one so they could better see the illuminated menu. Their faces lit up at each new discovery. "Besides the Big Mac, we'll get nuggets and fries, soda," Paul listed, observing how they nodded enthusiastically at each item. "And of course, McFlurry for dessert." "Chocolate?" they asked together, drawing a smile from the cashier. "How about trying all the flavors?" Paul suggested, and for a moment he thought the girls' eyes would pop right out of their heads. While waiting for the order, Sophie and Claire couldn't stand still, pointing to every person who walked by with a tray, commenting on the toys they saw other kids holding, and occasionally looking at Paul as if they wanted to confirm it was all real. When James brought the trays to the table they'd chosen, strategically near the playground, the girls fell silent, gazing at the sheer amount of food in front of them. "Is all of this for us?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "All for you," Paul confirmed. "You can start now." The first bite of the Big Mac was almost a solemn moment. The two bit into it together, as if on cue, their eyes widening at the taste. "It's way better than on TV," Sophie declared, already going in for the next bite. While the girls enjoyed their first McDonald's meal, Paul watched them with a mix of joy and concern. Where was their mother? What could have happened for two young children to wait so long on the street? Outside the sky was now completely dark. The lights of Manhattan putting on their own show through the restaurant's windows. Paul knew he needed to make a decision. He couldn't just leave two kids to go back to the street, but he also had to find a way to help them without scaring them. As Sophie and Claire shared the last chicken nugget, with a precision only twins could manage, and discussed which playground attraction to try first, Paul began formulating a plan. Somehow, he needed to help these girls and their mother. And so, on that ordinary night in Manhattan, among Big Macs and chocolate-covered smiles, Paul Matthews, the billionaire featured on business magazines, discovered that sometimes the greatest fortunes in the world can't compare to the genuine joy of two children experiencing their first McDonald's meal. McDonald's was quieter now, with only a few families occupying the distant tables. Claire absent-mindedly played with the straw from her second milkshake, while Sophie rested her head on her sister's shoulder. The welcoming environment and full bellies seemed to create a bubble of comfort they rarely experienced. "How long have you been without a home?" Paul asked gently, choosing his words carefully. Claire lifted her eyes from the straw, exchanging a quick glance with Sophie, as if asking permission. Her sister nodded slightly, and Claire took a deep breath before starting to speak. "We used to have a nice house," she said, her small voice carrying a weight no 5-year-old should know. "It was small, but it had our own room with unicorn wallpaper that Mom put up for us." Sophie squeezed her sister's hand, giving her the courage to continue. "Dad worked in a big store and Mom took care of us. She made cookies every Sunday." Claire smiled briefly at the memory. "But then Dad got sick, really sick." Paul noticed James, seated at a nearby table, pretending to read the newspaper, but clearly paying attention, straighten in his chair. "Mom said the hospital was too expensive," Claire continued, her fingers now tracing the table's edge. "She started working 2 jobs, but it still wasn't enough. Dad got sicker each day and we had to sell a lot of things. Even my frozen music box," Sophie added quietly, and Claire nodded. "One day," Claire swallowed hard, "Dad went to the hospital and never came back. Mom cried a lot, and soon after, men with papers came saying we had to leave our house." Paul felt his heart clench. How many families go through similar situations every day? How many children have their lives turned upside down by a system that doesn't forgive? "At first, we stayed at Aunt Martha's house," Claire went on. "But she also had money problems, and her apartment was tiny, so we started moving around a lot. We've slept in 5 different places," Sophie added, holding up 3 fingers on one hand and 2 on the other to illustrate. Claire nodded. "The last place was a small room Mum was renting, but yesterday the owner said he needed the room for someone who could pay more. So we had to leave." The girl paused, taking a sip of her milkshake before continuing. Paul noticed that some people at nearby tables had stopped eating and were discreetly listening to the story. "Mum always tries to make everything seem like an adventure so we won't be sad," Claire said, a small smile appearing on her face. When we have to sleep in different places, she says we're explorers looking for a magical new home. And when there isn't enough food, Sophie added, she makes a game of dividing everything into equal little pieces. We got really good at that. Claire nodded. We've learned a lot of things, like staying quiet when Mom has to work late and we need to wait. How not to make noise in the shelters so we don't bother other people. How to save food for hard days. Paul noticed a few people at nearby tables discreetly wiping tears. An older woman had her hand over her heart, shaking her head in sadness. The hardest part, Claire continued, her voice getting lower, is when people look at us like we're invisible. Or when they make a face because our clothes are dirty or old. Mom always says what matters is being clean on the inside, but sometimes it still hurts. Sophie hugged her sister, and Claire smiled gratefully before going on. But not everything is bad. Sometimes we meet nice people, like Miss Maria from the bakery, who always gives us leftover bread at the end of the day, or Mr. John from the newsstand who lets us read comics when it's raining and we need somewhere to stay. And now you, Sophie added, looking at Paul with shining eyes, who took us to McDonald's for the first time. Claire nodded enthusiastically. We've always wanted to come here. Every time we passed by, Mom said that one day, when things got better, she'd bring us. She'll be so happy when we tell her. The girl paused, her face taking on a more serious expression. Do you know what our biggest dream is? She asked, looking straight at Paul. What? He answered softly. To have a real home again, with our own room where we can put drawings on the wall. And a kitchen where Mum can make cookies on Sundays like before. Claire smiled dreamily. And maybe even have a puppy. It can be a small one, Sophie quickly added. We don't mind if it's small, as long as it's ours. Do you know what Mum's dream is? Claire went on. She thinks we don't hear her, but sometimes it's when she thinks we're sleeping, she talks to herself. She dreams of being able to give us 3 meals a day, send us to school, and never again leave us waiting while she looks for work. Paul tried to hide the emotion in his voice. Your mom sounds like a very special person. She's the best mom in the world, the twins declared in unison, prompting emotional smiles from the few customers still in the restaurant. Even when there's nothing to eat, she always finds a way to make us smile, Claire explained. She tells stories, sings songs, and teaches us things. Did you know she's teaching us to read? Every time she finds pieces of old newspapers or magazines, she uses them to teach us letters. And math too, Sophie added excitedly. We learn to count everything, people on the street, cars passing by, coins when someone is kind and gives something to Mom. Claire nodded. Mom says education is the only thing no one can take away from us. That's why she insists on teaching us, even when she's really tired. Paul watched the girls with a mix of admiration and sadness. Despite all the hardships, they had a light in their eyes, an unshakable hope. And their mother, even in the midst of so much adversity, found the strength to turn every difficult moment into an opportunity for learning and growth. A McDonald's employee who was cleaning nearby tables couldn't hide her tears as she listened to the story. Discreetly, she approached the girls' table and placed 2 Happy Meal toys beside them, with a gentle smile. Claire and Sophie looked at the toys with wide eyes, full of surprise and joy. Can we keep them? They asked Paul. Of course you can, he replied, thanking the employee with a nod. The girls hugged the toys as though they were precious treasures. We'll show them to Mom, Claire exclaimed excitedly. She'll be so happy to see that we made such a nice friend. Paul felt his heart tighten again. In his world of corporate meetings and billion-dollar deals, it was easy to forget there were people, entire families, struggling daily just to survive. The story of Claire and Sophie, told with the unique sincerity of children, was a powerful reminder of how cruel fate could be, but also of how the human spirit could remain resilient even in the hardest circumstances. Looking at the twins, who were now happily playing with their new toys, Paul made a decision. He couldn't change their past, but maybe he could help build them a better future. He just needed to find a way to help without scaring or offending the dignity of that family who, despite so many difficulties, stayed united by love and hope. The silence that followed Claire's account was broken by Sophie's soft voice, who until then had been quiet, taking in her sister's words. Do you know what I miss the most? She began. her large eyes fixed on the Happy Meal toy she was holding. The smell of coffee in the morning. Paul, still moved by Claire's story, turned his attention to Sophie. The girl seemed lost in her memories, a small nostalgic smile on her young face. Every morning, she continued, Mom made coffee and the smell would reach our room. It was like a nice alarm clock. Claire always woke up first, but she waited for me so we could go to the kitchen together. Claire squeezed her sister's hand, encouraging her to continue. Around them, the few remaining customers in McDonald's had completely stopped what they were doing to listen. Our house wasn't big, Sophie explained, using her little hands to show the size, but there was a place for everything. There was a window in the living room that let in the morning sun, and Mom put up yellow curtains she made herself. When the sun shone through them, it was like the whole room turned golden. A woman at a nearby table discreetly wiped away a tear, while her husband held her hand tightly. The best place was our room. Sophie smiled more widely now. Mom drew unicorns on the walls because we couldn't buy real wallpaper. She spent 3 days drawing just to surprise us. It wasn't perfect like what you see in stores, but to us it was the most beautiful in the world because she made it herself. And there were stars on the ceiling, Claire added excitedly. Yes, Sophie agreed enthusiastically. Dad stuck glow-in-the-dark stars up there. Every night before bedtime, he'd tell a different story about each constellation he created for us. Paul noticed more people had gathered to listen, including some employees who had paused their tasks. James, his driver, no longer tried to hide that he was listening closely. A real home, Sophie continued, her voice taking on a dreamy tone, is where you don't have to be afraid when it rains hard. In our old house, when there was a storm, we made blanket forts in the living room, and Mom told us stories until we fell asleep. Now, she hesitated, now we just pray to find a dry place to spend the night. A heavy silence fell over the restaurant. The manager, who had approached to ask employees to get back to work, remained silent, equally captivated by the little girl's account. But do you know what's most important in a home? Sophie asked, looking directly at Paul. It's being able to keep memories. On the street, we can't carry much. When we have to leave somewhere in a hurry, there's only time to grab what's most important. But in a house, she smiled shyly. In a house you can keep drawings on the fridge, make marks on the wall to see how much you've grown, have a special place for every toy. Claire nodded vigorously. And have a desk to do homework. Mom always says that when we have a home again, she'll sign us up for school. She keeps all our papers in a special folder, waiting for that day. And have a couch, Sophie went on, getting excited. A couch where we can all sit together and watch TV. It doesn't have to be new, it can even be old, but let it be ours. In our old house, we had a brown couch that sagged a bit on one side, but it was the most comfortable place in the world when we all squeezed together. A young waitress passing by stopped, holding the tray against her chest, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. What I want most, Sophie lowered her voice in as if sharing a precious secret, is to have a bookshelf of books. Out here, we only have the magazine scraps Mom finds to teach us to read. But in a real house, we could have entire books, with all the pages. And photos, Claire added. We only have 2 old photos that Mom keeps in a plastic bag so they don't get wet when it rains. In a house, we could have a wall full of pictures, like we used to before. Sophie took a napkin and started drawing with a pen Paul had lent her. Look, it would be something like this, she explained, making childlike but determined lines. Here would be the kitchen, where Mom can make cookies again. Here's our bedroom, with 2 beds side by side because we don't like to sleep apart. And here, she pointed to a space in the drawing, is a little corner just for Mom, with a comfy armchair so she can rest after work, instead of sleeping on the hard floor. By then, several people in the restaurant were openly crying. An older man got up from his table and walked to the manager, whispering something in his ear. The manager nodded, discreetly wiping his own eyes. And you know what else a real home has? Sophie went on, her eyes gleaming. Nice smells, like the smell of clean clothes, of food on the stove, of morning coffee. Right now, all we smell is the street. Rain, sometimes garbage. But in a house. She closed her eyes, as if she could imagine it. Everything smells right. And there are sounds too, Claire added. Good sounds, like the TV playing softly, the clock ticking, the washing machine running. And silence, Sophie finished softly. Sometimes on the street it's so noisy we can't sleep. Cars, people shouting, sirens. In a real home there are times when everything's quiet and all you can hear is your family. Paul realized the entire restaurant had fallen silent. Dozens of people absorbing the heartfelt yet profound words of a mere 5-year-old. But do you know what's most important in a home? Sophie asked, looking around at all the people watching her. It's being able to invite friends to visit. We can never really make friends on the street because we never know where we'll be the next day. But in a home, she smiled timidly at Paul, we could invite you over for breakfast any day. That was more than many of those present could bear. The older woman at the nearby table stood up and, with Paul's permission, hugged the two girls. Soon others approached, some offering words of comfort, others simply wanting to be close to these children who, with such purity and wisdom, had reminded everyone of the true meaning of home. The McDonald's manager, after his conversation with the older man, approached the table with a box full of meals and toys. For you to take to your mom, he explained, voice choked with emotion. And come back any time you like, you'll always be welcome here. Sophie and Claire looked at all this kindness with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. It was as if, for a moment, McDonald's had turned into the home they so longed for, a warm, welcoming place where people truly cared. Paul watched everything in silence, his heart torn between the pain of seeing such suffering and the admiration for the strength and hope of these girls. In his pocket, his phone vibrated incessantly, likely the board of directors demanding his presence at the meeting. But for the first time in his billionaire life, Paul Matthews was absolutely sure he was exactly where he needed to be. As Sophie continued her drawing on the napkin, now adding small details like curtains on the windows and flowers in the garden, Paul began to form a plan in his mind. These girls and their mother didn't just need a physical home. They needed a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity. And perhaps, just maybe, fate had placed him right there at that exact moment to help make their dream come true. Night had long fallen over Manhattan when Paul's Porsche left the main avenues, following quieter streets under the twins' guidance. The contrast between the luxury car interior and the scene playing out beyond the window was growing more pronounced. Sophie and Claire, cuddled in the Italian leather back seat, clutched their McDonald's bags as if they were precious treasures. "Turn there, after that building with the peeling wall," Claire instructed, pointing through the glass. Her voice carried a peculiar mix of pride and hesitation. "This is where we live now," Sophie added, "but it's not as bad as it looks. Mom made it nice." Paul exchanged a meaningful look with James in the rearview mirror as the car turned the corner. What came into view was an empty lot, wedged between two abandoned buildings, where several people had improvised shelters with materials they'd found, scraps of wood, faded tarps, cardboard, and rusty metal sheets. "It's there!" the twins exclaimed in unison, pointing to a structure that, though simple, stood out from the others because of its organization. Paul parked the car at a respectful distance. Around them, some people cast wary glances at the luxury vehicle, while others gathered around small improvised fires for warmth in the chilly Manhattan night. "Mom got that wood from a construction site," Sophie explained proudly. "Mr. John Dad, who works there, let her take the pieces they were throwing away. And she lined everything with cardboard inside so we wouldn't be so cold," Claire added. "She even put up curtains she made out of old sheets." As they walked toward the shelter, Paul observed the details revealing a mother's extraordinary effort to create a minimally dignified environment for her daughters. A worn but clean little rug marked the entrance. Colorful drawings by the girls were carefully attached to the wooden walls, protected from moisture by plastic bags. An improvised clothesline served as a drying rack for some garments that, though visibly worn, were meticulously clean, swaying in the night breeze. "Mom! Mom!" the twins called out in unison, their excited voices echoing through the lot. A young woman emerged from the shelter, and Paul felt his heart tighten. Anne couldn't have been older than 30, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived many lives in one. Despite her simple clothes and the evident fatigue on her face, there was a natural dignity in her bearing that commanded respect. Her light brown hair, pinned up in a simple bun, framed a face that, though marked by worry, still held traces of serene beauty. "My little ones," she exclaimed, hugging her daughters tightly, though her eyes never left the well-dressed figure of Paul. "I was so worried. Where were you?" "At McDonald's, Mom." Sophie was practically jumping with excitement. "Paul took us. And we brought food for you, too." "We had Big Macs and fries and ice cream," Claire added, holding up her bag like a trophy. Anne stood up slowly, instinctively positioning herself between her daughters and the stranger. "Paul? Paul Matthews, Mum." He introduced himself with a respectful nod, keeping a distance that acknowledged her apprehension. "I found your daughters waiting on the street, and he was amazing, Mum," Claire interrupted. "He let us order whatever we wanted." "And gave us toys," Sophie added, showing her Happy Meal toy. Anne studied Paul intently, her eyes reflecting the internal conflict between gratitude and distrust. Why did you help my daughters?" Paul chose his words carefully. "Because no child should spend the entire day without eating. Your daughters are extraordinary, Ms. Anne, polite, smart, and with enormous hearts. You must be a remarkable mother." Something in the sincerity of his words seemed to reach Anne. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though caution lingered in her eyes. "Mum," Sophie tugged gently at her sleeve, "can we show our new toys to Ms. Maria? Please." Anne looked lovingly at her daughters, then back at Paul, as if gauging the situation. "You can, but stay where I can see you." The girls ran off excitedly toward an older lady sitting near one of the fires, leaving Anne and Paul in a momentary silence. "Please excuse the simplicity of our home," Anne finally said, gesturing to 2 wooden crates serving as seats. "It's not much, but we try to keep everything as organized as possible." "It's very clear how much care and love you put into this place," Paul replied sincerely, sitting on one of the crates. Anne sat on the other, her hands restless in her lap, betraying her nervousness. For a moment, only the distant sound of the girls' laughter and the crackling fires filled the air. "I never imagined our life would turn out this way," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We had a normal life, you know. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Robert, my husband, was a manager at a department store on 5th Avenue. I stayed home with the girls, gave private math lessons to make some extra money. We had plans, dreams." Her voice faltered, and she needed a moment to gather herself before continuing. "Then came the diagnosis, cancer. At first, we thought it would be something treatable. Our insurance covered the initial procedures, but then," she swallowed hard, "the complications started. We needed more expensive treatments, specific medications. We sold the car first, then whatever furniture we could spare. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning by day, cashier at a pharmacy by night. The girls stayed with my sister, but she had her own financial problem." Paul listened intently, his heart heavy with each new detail. Anne went on, her voice now choked with emotion. "Robert got worse every day, but he refused to give up. 'My girls need me,' he used to say. Even in the worst moments, when the pain was unbearable, he still found strength to tell Sophie and Claire stories before bed. But the bills never stopped. The bank started pressing us for our mortgage payments. I had to quit one job to care for Robert full-time. That's when everything began to crumble." Silent tears slid down Anne's face, but she wiped them away quickly, as though she couldn't afford to show weakness. "When Robert passed, it was like the last pillar holding our life together broke. We couldn't keep the house, and we lost almost everything else we had left. My sister took us in for a while, but her apartment was so small, and her husband started complaining. After that, it was a series of temporary places, each one worse than the last. The girls told me you still educate them, even under these circumstances," Paul commented softly. A small smile lit Anne's tired face. "It's my way of keeping hope alive. I turn everything into a learning opportunity, counting passing cars for math, reading street signs for letters, making up stories about the constellations we can see between buildings. I try to make sure they never lose curiosity or their love for learning." "And how has the job search been?" The smile vanished from Anne's face. "Almost impossible. Without a permanent address, many places won't even take my application. Others worry about my situation with the twins. I do some temp work, mostly cleaning, but it's never enough to rent a decent place. Sometimes I manage to save a bit, but then some emergency pops up. Medicine when the girls get sick or we have to move suddenly from somewhere. What about social services? Shelters. We've tried, she answered with a weary sigh, but most are always full and some— She hesitated, lowering her voice. Some aren't safe for children. Here, at least, we've formed a small community. Ms. Maria looks after the girls when I need to go out. Mr. Jose at the grocery store sometimes gives us fruit that's about to expire. Ms. Carmen lets us use her bathroom to wash ourselves. In the background, the twins' laughter echoed as they played with their new toys, seemingly unaware of the seriousness of the adults' conversation. The hardest part, Anne continued, her voice cracking slightly, is watching my daughters grow up like this. They're so young, but they already know things no child should. How to stay quiet when there's danger, how to stretch food, how to keep warm. Sometimes at night, when they're asleep, I cry wondering if I'm failing them. If I should have done something differently. Miss Anne, Paul interrupted kindly, from what I've seen today, you're not failing at all. Your daughters are extraordinary, smart, compassionate, and most importantly, they're happy despite everything. That's a testament to your love and dedication as a mother. Anne wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Thank you. Not just for your kind words, but for looking after them today. I was so worried when I took longer than expected. There was a huge line at the job agency. Then the bus broke down. Ms. Anne, Paul began carefully, I know we don't know each other well, but I'd like to help your family. Not out of pity, but because your daughters showed me the true meaning of strength and hope today. You've built something precious here, even under the worst circumstances. Why? Anne asked directly, her eyes studying Paul intently. Why do you care about our situation? Because sometimes fate puts people in our path for a reason, Paul answered simply. And because every family deserves a chance to start over. In the background, Sophie and Claire had begun a little dance performance for Miss Maria, their innocent laughter piercing the cold Manhattan night. Anne watched her daughters for a long moment, then turned back to Paul. In her eyes, for the first time that night, shone something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Maybe, son, she said softly, maybe we can talk more about it. Paul nodded, sensing this moment marked the beginning of a significant change in that family's life. Fate had placed two small twins in his path that afternoon, and now he had the chance to make the real difference he had always craved with his fortune. The city lights glittered in the distance, and in that little sliver of land between abandoned buildings, a new story was about to unfold, a story of hope, new beginnings, and the extraordinary strength of a mother's love for her children. The following morning dawned with a different energy in the small makeshift shelter. Paul had arrived early, accompanied by James and a social worker named Sarah Williams, whom he knew through his philanthropic work. The luxurious Porsche was parked at the same respectful distance as the previous night, now joined by an unmarked van. Anne had been awake since the first ray of sunlight, a habit she'd developed from years of seeking temporary jobs. The twins were still asleep, bundled under their blankets, their peaceful faces oblivious to the changes about to take place in their lives. "Good morning, Miss Anne," Paul greeted softly, mindful of the other inhabitants of the site who were still sleeping. "I hope it's not too early." "Not at all," Anne replied, nervously trying to neaten her hair. "We always wake up early." Sarah stepped forward, her professional smile genuinely warm. "Ms. Anne, I'm Sarah Williams, a social worker. Mr. Matthews explained your situation to me, and I'm here to help in any way I can." Anne looked hesitantly from one to the other, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Paul noticed her apprehension and hurried to explain. "Miss Anne, I know this might seem overwhelming, but I'd like to start by helping you with some immediate basic needs. Sarah is here to ensure everything is done correctly and professionally." At that moment, Sophie and Claire began to stir, their sleepy eyes widening when they recognized Paul. "Paul!" they exclaimed in unison, running to hug him without the slightest reservation. "Girls!" Anne gently scolded, but Paul chuckled. "It's all right," he assured. "Actually, I brought a surprise for you two." James began unloading some bags from the van, and the twins' eyes sparkled with curiosity. "First," Paul began, addressing Anne, "we brought some basic supplies, food, hygiene products, clothing." "That's very kind," Anne interjected, visibly uncomfortable, "but I can't accept so much." "Please," Sarah intervened softly. "It's not charity, it's support. We all need help sometimes." Paul nodded. "Also, I have some proposals I'd like to discuss with you, about housing, the girls' education, job opportunities." The twins, who were exploring the bags with James, squealed with delight upon finding new clothes. "Mom, look!" Sophie held up a sky-blue dress. "It's so pretty." "And there are shoes too," Claire added, holding a pair of pink sneakers. Anne watched the scene with tears in her eyes, torn between pride and the necessity of accepting help. Sarah approached her discreetly. "Ms. Anne, I know it's difficult to accept help from strangers, but look at your daughters. Don't they deserve this chance?" Paul waited patiently while Anne processed everything. The twins kept discovering treasures in the bags, each new find accompanied by exclamations of joy. "There are toothbrushes with strawberry toothpaste," Sophie announced, "and apple-scented shampoo," Claire added, peeking into the bag. "We also brought some new blankets," James noted, unloading more items from the van, "and some educational toys," Sarah suggested. Anne finally found her voice. It's so generous, but I need to understand better what's going on. Why all this?" Paul motioned for everyone to sit. James provided a few folding chairs he'd brought, creating a small circle to talk. "Ms. Anne," Paul began, "last night, after hearing your story and seeing how you keep your family together despite the toughest circumstances, I realized I have a unique opportunity to make a difference, not just with temporary donations, but with real, long-lasting change." Sarah opened a folder she was carrying. "Mr. Matthews has a social assistance program through his company. We help families get back on their feet by providing housing, education, and work opportunities." "But why us?" Anne asked, still hesitant. Paul smiled gently. "Because your daughters showed me the true meaning of hope and resilience yesterday. And because you proved to be an extraordinary mother, preserving your children's dignity and education under the harshest conditions." The twins, who had come closer to hear the conversation, sat on their mother's lap. "Mom," Sophie whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "do you think we can have a real bedroom again?" Anne's heart seemed to melt at her daughter's innocent question. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's complicated." "Actually," Paul interjected gently, "I have some apartment options to show you. They belong to my company, fully furnished, in safe neighborhoods near good schools." The twins' eyes widened. "School?" they asked in unison. "Yes," Sarah smiled. "Would you like to go to school?" "Mom always said we'd go when we had a house," Claire exclaimed excitedly. Anne seemed overwhelmed. "But how? I can't pay rent yet." "The program offers 6 months of subsidized housing," Sarah explained. "During that time, we help you find employment, offer vocational training if needed, and provide all the support you need to settle in. We also have openings in the administrative area of my company," Paul added. "Sarah told me you have experience teaching math privately." Anne nodded, surprised he remembered that detail from her story. "Perfect. We have a corporate training program that could be ideal for you." The twins watched the conversation like a tennis match, their eyes shining with each new possibility mentioned. "And there's more," Sarah continued. "The program includes psychological support for the entire family, if you want it, assistance with paperwork, and academic support for the girls." "We can really go to school?" Sophie asked, barely containing her excitement. "With uniforms and everything," Claire added. Paul smiled. "Uniforms, school supplies, whatever you need." Anne hugged her daughters tightly, silent tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll consider it," Paul replied kindly. "You don't have to decide everything right now. How about we start with breakfast?" James brought a few things. As if on cue, James started unloading containers with coffee, hot chocolate, fresh bread, fruit, and other breakfast items. The smell of hot food drew curious looks from the other residents around them. "Please," Paul said to Anne, noticing her concern for her neighbors. "Invite whoever you like to join us." Soon, a small group formed around the folding chairs. Mrs. Maria, who always looked after the twins, was the first to approach, followed by other residents. James continued bringing food from the van, while Sarah spoke discreetly to some of the adults about the social assistance program. Sophie and Claire ran off to show their new clothes to Miss Maria, who smiled, moved by the girls' happiness. "Look, Miss Maria," Sophie showed her the blue dress. "Now I can wear pretty clothes like the other kids." "And we're going to school," Claire added, twirling in her new pink sneakers. Anne watched everything with mixed emotions. Paul approached her discreetly. "I know it's a lot to process, but I want you to know there's no pressure. We can take everything at your pace, in whatever way makes you feel most comfortable. It's just—" Anne hesitated. "It feels too good to be true. After all this time fighting alone—" "You'll never be alone again," Sarah assured, joining the conversation. "Our team will be here every step of the way." The twins came running back, now holding the educational toys they'd found in the bags. "Mom, look, there are math games," Sophie showed her excitedly. "And books with stories," Claire added, hugging an illustrated book. "Can we read them now?" Anne smiled through her tears. "Of course you can, my loves." While the girls settled down with their new treasures, Paul, Sarah and Anne continued discussing practical details of the program. James discreetly organized the supplies, separating items for the other residents as well. "The first step," Sarah explained, "would be to visit some of the available apartments. We can go today if you'd like." "What about the school?" Anne asked, beginning to allow herself to consider the possibilities. "We have partnerships with several great institutions," Paul replied, "all with adaptation programs for children who've been out of school." Morning wore on, and with it the weight of years of struggle seemed to begin to lift from Anne's shoulders. The twins, between bites of fresh bread and sips of hot chocolate, were already enthusiastically planning how to decorate their future room. "Can we have a bookshelf for our books?" Sophie asked hopefully. "And a little table for drawing?" Claire chimed in. Paul smiled. "You can have all that and more, miss." Maria came over to Anne, holding her hands between her own. "Accept this blessing, dear. You and your girls deserve it." Anne looked around at her daughters, radiant in their new clothes, at her neighbors sharing a proper breakfast, at Paul and his team, who had brought hope where there was only uncertainty, and finally allowed herself to believe that real change was possible. "I think," she said softly, "I think we'd like to see those apartments." The twins shrieked with joy, running to hug their mom. Paul and Sarah exchanged satisfied smiles, while James began discreetly organizing logistics for the visits. "But first," Anne added, gazing lovingly at her daughters, "let's try on these new clothes and get ourselves ready." Sophie and Claire ran toward the bags, taking out their new belongings with reverence. Miss Maria offered to help them get dressed, leading them to her own shelter where they could have more privacy. While the girls got ready, Anne allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. "Mr. Matthews, Paul, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he responded gently. "Just promise me you'll give yourself and your daughters the chance to rebuild your lives." Anne nodded, wiping away a stubborn tear. "You know," she said quietly, "last night after you left, the girls spent hours talking about how magical it was to go to McDonald's for the first time. Sophie said it felt like a dream. And now—" She gestured at the bags, the papers Sarah was organizing, the entire shift unfolding before her. "Now it feels like the dream is continuing." "It's not a dream, Miss Anne," Paul assured her. "It's just the beginning of a new story for your family." The twins came running back, transformed in their new outfits, hair combed, faces glowing with joy. They looked like completely different children, not because of the clothes themselves, but because of the restored dignity that radiated from them. "We're ready," they announced in unison. And they truly were, ready not just to visit apartments, but to take their first steps toward a new life, one where dreams weren't just dreams, but real possibilities beginning to unfold on that hopeful morning. The social services office was crowded that Monday morning. Anne clutched a folder containing the few documents she'd managed to preserve during the months of hardship, while Sophie and Claire quietly colored in a corner of the waiting room. Sarah, the social worker assigned to them by Paul, leafed through a stack of forms with a focused expression. "Here are the girls' birth certificates," Anne said, carefully pulling out 2 slightly crumpled papers. "And my ID card, but my social security card, I think we lost it the last time we had to leave a place in a hurry." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Don't worry, we can request a replacement. The most important thing is we have the children's basic documents." The last 48 hours had been an emotional roller coaster. After a morning of surprises and renewed hope, practical challenges followed: endless forms, bureaucratic requirements, and the necessary documentation for almost everything. "Ms. Matthews?" someone called from the reception area. "It's Anne Stewart," Sarah corrected, standing up. "Come on, Miss Anne." The twins quickly gathered their coloring materials and followed their mom and Sarah into a small room. The staff member behind the desk looked tired, but her expression softened when she saw the identical little girls. "So," she began, adjusting her glasses, "we're processing an application for emergency housing assistance and reintegration into the school system." "Exactly," Sarah replied professionally. "The Stewart family has support from the Matthews Social Assistance Program, but we need to regularize all the documentation." The next hour tested their patience. Every document presented led to the need for 3 more. Each answer prompted more questions. The twins grew restless in their chairs. "Mom," Sophie whispered, "are we still going to be able to go to school?" Anne felt her heart tighten. "We are, sweetie. We just need to finish these papers first." "But why does it take so long?" Claire asked, her little voice betraying some frustration. Just then, the office door opened and Paul slipped in quietly. The girls immediately brightened at his arrival. "Sorry I'm late," he said softly. "How are we doing?" "Mr. Matthews," the staff member straightened in her chair, her tone changing noticeably. "I didn't realize you were personally involved in this case." "The Stewart family is very special," he replied simply, taking a seat next to Anne. "I've got the missing documents." From his briefcase, Paul produced a series of official papers: Anne's social security replacement, hospital documents related to Robert's treatment, even old tax returns Anne thought were lost forever. "How?" Anne started to ask, but Paul just smiled. "I have a few contacts who could speed things up. What matters is that now we can move forward." With Paul's presence and the documentation now complete, doors began to open. The staff member quickly processed the necessary forms, stamping and signing documents with newfound efficiency. "The temporary shelter on 35th Street is available immediately," she informed, checking her computer. "It's a new facility with private rooms for families." "And what about school?" Sarah asked, taking notes. "Lincoln Primary School has a special reintegration program," the staff member replied. "It's only 2 blocks from the shelter." The twins, who had resumed drawing in a corner of the room, raised their heads at the word school. "Can we go see it?" Sophie asked hopefully. "Of course," Paul replied before any other adult could answer. "In fact, I already arranged a visit for this afternoon, if your mum agrees." Anne looked at her daughters, their faces glowing with anticipation, and nodded. That would be wonderful. The morning continued with more forms, signatures, and procedures. But now there was a different feeling in the air. Each piece of paper signed was a step toward a new life. "Now we need to discuss employment," Sarah commented, opening a new folder. "Miss Anne, I see you have a background in math." "Yes, I used to give private lessons," Anne confirmed, "and I worked as an administrative assistant before." "Perfect," Paul gently interrupted, "because we have a position in the financial department at Matthews Industries that could be perfect for you. The schedule aligns with the girls' school hours." Anne blinked, surprised. "But it's been so long since I worked in my field." "The program includes full training," Sarah explained. "And there's a daycare in the building for the girls after school, if necessary." Tears started to form in Anne's eyes. It was everything she had dreamed of: a decent job, schooling for her daughters, a real chance to start over. "And are there computers at the daycare?" Claire asked excitedly, clearly having overheard part of the conversation. "There's a study room," Paul answered, smiling, "with computers, books, and teachers to help with homework." "Hear that, Sophie?" Claire nudged her sister. We'll get to use computers. The staff member, who initially seemed so bureaucratic, now smiled as she watched their interaction. I just need a few more signatures here, she said, pushing the last of the forms to Anne. While Anne signed, Paul approached the twins, who had returned to their drawings. What are you drawing? He asked, looking at the colored papers. It's our new life, Sophie explained, holding up her drawing. Look, here's the school. Here's where Mom will work, and here we are using the computer. And here's you. Claire pointed to a tall figure in the drawing. Because you're our guardian angel now. Paul felt a lump in his throat at the innocence and trust of the girls. Sarah, who had come closer, placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. All set, the staff member finally announced. Everything's processed. You can move into the shelter today, and the girls can start school next Monday after their assessment. Anne hugged her daughters, who jumped for joy. Did you hear that? We'll have our own room tonight. With real beds? Sophie asked. With real beds, Sarah confirmed. And tomorrow we'll shop for your school uniforms. As Sarah finished the final details with the staff member, Paul observed the Stewart family. Anne looked lighter, as though a huge weight had been lifted. The twins practically glowed with happiness, excitedly planning how they would decorate their new space. Mr. Matthews, Anne approached him, her voice tight with emotion. How can I ever thank you? Thank me by being happy, he replied simply. And please, call me Paul. It still feels like a dream, she confessed. I'm afraid I'll wake up. It's not a dream, he assured. It's a new beginning. And I'll be here to help every step of the way. When they finally left the office, the afternoon sun bathed the city in a golden light. James was waiting with the car to take them to the shelter, and then to the school for the visit. Ready for your new adventure? Paul asked the twins, who nodded enthusiastically. Anne watched her daughters climb into the car, holding their drawings and dreams. The morning of bureaucracy had been exhausting, but every stamp, every signature, every completed form was a brick in the construction of their future, a future that, for the first time in a long while, seemed bright and full of possibilities. Yes, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. We're ready. The temporary shelter on 35th Street was nothing like what Anne had imagined. The 3-story building, recently renovated, had a clean, well-maintained facade. A small landscaped area with benches adorned the entrance, and colorful flowers bloomed in carefully arranged planters. Is this it? Sophie asked, her eyes wide as James parked the car. It looks like a hotel, Claire exclaimed, pressing her nose against the car window. Sarah, who had arrived earlier to get everything ready, waited for them at the entrance. Welcome to your new temporary home, she beamed, holding a folder of documents and a set of keys. The Stewart family carried few possessions, some bags of the new clothes Paul had provided, a box of their few remaining personal items, and Anne's folder of documents. But there was something different in their faces. Hope. You'll be on the 2nd floor, Sarah explained, leading them inside. The place was surprisingly welcoming, with walls painted in soft tones and colorful pictures adorning the corridors. We have a common area on the ground floor with a TV room, library, and computers. In the basement, there's a free laundry facility for residents. The twins took in every detail with fascination, clinging to each other's hands as they climbed the stairs. Anne walked in silence, still processing the dramatic change in their circumstances. Here we are, Sarah announced, stopping at a door numbered 205. This will be your space for the next few months, until we find a suitable, permanent home. When the door opened, Anne couldn't hold back her tears. The apartment was small but spotless, with a combined living kitchen area, 1 bedroom and a bathroom. The furnishings were simple but new, a twin bed for Anne in the living area, which could be used as a sofa by day, and a bunk bed for the girls in the bedroom. Look, Sophie. Claire ran to the bunk bed. We can sleep one up top and one down here. And there's a desk. Sophie pointed to a small piece of furniture under the bedroom window. We can do our homework here. Paul, who had discreetly accompanied the family, smiled upon seeing the girls' excitement. There are a few more surprises, he commented, opening the closet in the bedroom. Inside, there were brand new school uniforms hanging, colourful backpacks, and a box of school supplies for each girl. On the closet floor, 2 pairs of new sneakers sat beside the ones they were already wearing. "It's all ours?" Anne asked, her voice trembling. "All yours," Sarah confirmed, "and in the kitchen you'll find basic supplies to get started. The shelter's cafeteria serves 3 meals a day, but you can also cook here if you prefer." Anne walked into the little kitchen, opening the cabinets with reverence. Plates, cups, utensils, all new, clean, and organized. The fridge held fresh milk, fruits, vegetables, and other basics. "They even have cookies," Sophie announced, opening a cabinet. "And grape juice," Claire added, peeking into the fridge. "The bathroom has clean towels and toiletries," Sarah went on. "And tomorrow, a staff member will come by to help you get familiar with the building." The twins began their own exploration, discovering small details that felt like incredible luxuries to them: a bedside lamp, delicate curtains, a soft rug on the bedroom floor. "There's a place for us to hang our drawings," Sophie noticed, pointing to a corkboard on the bedroom wall. "And drawers to store our clothes," Claire added, opening and closing the dresser drawers with fascination. Anne sat on the bed in the living area, momentarily overwhelmed by emotion. Paul approached quietly. "Are you okay? It's just—" She wiped away a tear. "It's been so long since we had a safe place to sleep. Our own bathroom. A kitchen. And this is only the beginning," he assured gently. "In a few months, once you're settled in your job, we'll look for a permanent apartment." Sarah joined them, holding some papers. "The building has 24-hour security, and there's always a social worker on duty. Here are the rules, mealtimes, and information on available programs." "What programs?" Anne asked, flipping through the documents. "We offer computer classes, help with resumes, and support groups," Sarah explained. "And for children, there are educational after-school activities, tutoring, even weekend art classes." As if they'd heard the magic word, the twins ran in from exploring the bedroom. "Art classes?" "Yes," Sarah smiled. "Actually, the art group meets this afternoon if you'd like to join." "Can we, Mom?" they asked in unison. Anne looked at her daughters, clean, well-dressed, smiling, and felt her heart swell. "Of course you can." "But first," Paul interjected, "how about we all have lunch together in the cafeteria? That way you can meet some other families and see the place." The cafeteria, located on the ground floor, was spacious and bright. Round tables were scattered throughout the area, creating a more welcoming atmosphere than a typical institutional setting. Some families were already eating, and the aroma of homemade food filled the air. "Hello?" A girl about 6 years old approached the twins. "Are you new? Want to sit with us?" Sophie and Claire looked at their mother, who nodded encouragingly. Within minutes, the 3 girls were chatting happily at a nearby table, while the adults served themselves at the buffet. "Children usually adapt more quickly," Sarah commented, watching the interaction. "It's amazing how easily they make friends." Anne observed her daughters with both joy and admiration. After so many months of forced isolation, seeing them interact normally with another child was like a balm to her soul. "Miss Anne," Paul said softly, "I need to head to the office to deal with some things, but Sarah will stay here to help with anything you need. Tomorrow, I'll come back so we can visit the school." "Paul," Anne touched his arm before he could leave, "thank you. Not just for the material support, but for giving dignity back to my family." He smiled, clearly moved. "The dignity was always there, Miss Anne. You never lost it. You just needed a chance to rebuild." After Paul left, Anne joined her daughters for lunch. The food was simple but tasty, and for the first time in a long while, they could savor a meal without rush or worry. "Mom," Sophie called between bites, "Lucy said there's a movie night in the TV room. Can we watch?" "And tomorrow, there's story time in the library," Claire added excitedly. Anne smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "We can do all of that, my little ones. We have time now." Later that afternoon, after the art class where the twins created their first paintings to decorate their new room, the Stewart family prepared for their first night in the shelter. The evening bath, once a daily logistical challenge, was now a moment of pleasure with hot water and soft towels. "Can I sleep on the top bunk tonight?" Sophie asked. already in new pajamas. "No, it's my turn," Claire protested. "How about switching every week?" Anne suggested, brushing the girls' hair. The solution seemed to please both, and soon they were in their respective beds, hugging the stuffed animals they had received earlier. "Mum," Claire called sleepily, "this is better than a dream, right?" "Yes, it is, my love," Anne replied, kissing each daughter's forehead. "This is our new reality." When the girls finally fell asleep, Anne allowed herself a few moments of reflection in her own bed. The silence there was different, not the scary silence of the streets, but a comforting, protected hush. Through the window, she could see Manhattan's lights shining. The same lights that once felt cold and distant now conveyed a message of hope. Somewhere out there, Paul Matthews had looked beyond her desperate circumstances and seen the potential in her family. With that comforting thought, Anne fell asleep for the first time in months without fear of tomorrow. The temporary shelter was more than a roof over their heads. It was the first step toward rebuilding their lives, a place where dignity wasn't just a word, but a tangible reality materializing in every small detail of their new day-to-day life. Lincoln Primary School gleamed under the morning sun as Anne adjusted the bow on Claire's uniform for the third time. Sophie was already perfect, clutching her new backpack in both hands as though afraid this treasure might vanish at any moment. "Nervous?" Paul asked kindly, watching the twins waiting outside the school office. "A little," Claire admitted, squeezing her sister's hand. "What if we don't know the same things the other kids do?" Sophie whispered, voicing the fear they both shared. Anne knelt in front of her daughters, tucking a stray strand of Sophie's hair behind her ear. "Remember what I always say? You two are very smart. And Ms. Jenkins said she'll help you catch up." Principal Williams, a kind-looking older woman with a firm voice, opened her office door. "Stewart family, please come in." The enrollment process went surprisingly smoothly, thanks to the prior work of Paul and his team. The principal explained the school's special program for children reintegrating into the educational system, emphasizing the extra support the twins would get. "We have after-school tutoring," she explained, showing them a schedule. "And our school psychologist, Dr. Maria, will be available for weekly sessions." "What about school supplies?" Anne asked, worried. Paul spoke gently. "Everything's taken care of, Miss Anne. The girls have all they need in their backpacks." The twins opened their backpacks reverently, finding brand-new notebooks, fully stocked pencil cases, textbooks, and even educational tablets. "Is this Sowers?" Sophie asked, touching the tablet with extreme care. "Completely yours," Paul confirmed. "They're tools to help you learn." Ms. Jenkins, a young enthusiastic teacher with freckles and a warm smile, arrived to take the girls to their new classroom. "Hi, Sophie and Claire. We're so excited to have you," she beamed. "Did you know we have a special art project this week?" "I heard you two love to draw." The twins looked at each other, surprised someone already knew of their interest in art. Paul discreetly winked at them. The moment of parting was emotional. Anne hugged her daughters tightly, fighting back tears. "I'll be here at dismissal," she promised. "And I'll drop by during lunch," Paul added, "to see how your first day is going." They watched the twins follow Miss Jenkins down the hall, and Anne couldn't hold back a tear. "I never thought I'd see this day," she whispered. The first day brought its expected challenges. At lunch, Paul found the girls a bit overwhelmed by all the new things. Sophie had gotten mixed up with some numbers in math class, and Claire had been too shy to read aloud. "But Ms. Jenkins was super nice," Sophie said, biting into her sandwich. "She said we can learn at our own pace." "And we made new friends," Claire added excitedly. "Emily let me borrow her colored pencils in art class." As days turned into weeks, the twins began to blossom in their school environment. Sophie discovered a natural talent for science, fascinated by the simple experiments they did in class. Claire, on the other hand, showed an exceptional gift for storytelling, enchanting her classmates during language activities. Paul made a point of closely following the girls' progress. He bought extra books when he found out about Claire's growing love of reading, and a small experiment kit for Sophie when she mentioned her curiosity about chemical reactions. "Their progress is remarkable," Miss Jenkins remarked during a follow-up meeting. especially considering how long they've been out of school. Anne listened to the reports with pride and gratitude. Her daughters were not just adapting, they were shining. A month after school started, a special event marked the girls' true integration into the school community. During the Science and Arts Fair, Sophie presented an experiment about states of matter, and Claire displayed a short illustrated story she had written. Paul insisted on attending, photographing every moment. "We need to record these achievements," he said as the girls posed proudly next to their projects. Their success at school began to spill over into other areas of their lives. At the shelter, the twins started a small reading club with other children. On weekends, Claire wrote stories to read during story time, while Sophie led supervised science experiments with safe materials. "You know what I like best about school," Sophie commented one night, doing her homework at the small desk in their room. "It's that I get to dream about the future." "What do you mean?" Anne asked, helping Claire with her writing assignment. "Now I know I can be a scientist if I want," Sophie explained. "Ms. Jenkins said there are scholarships and everything. And I can be a writer," Claire added, "or a teacher like Ms. Jenkins." Paul, who had stopped by for a follow-up visit, smiled at their conversation. "You can be anything you want," he assured them. "Education opens every door." Paul's support went beyond practical matters. He made sure to be present at every important moment. Claire's first theatre club performance, Sophie's first medal at the science fair, parent-teacher meetings. "You don't have to do all this," Anne commented one day, watching him help the girls with a special project. "I don't have to," he agreed, "but I want to." Seeing them realize their potential is one of the greatest gifts I've ever received. As the semester progressed, the Stewart twins became known at the school not as the girls from the shelter, but as Sophie, the little scientist, and Claire, the storyteller. Education had not only opened doors, it restored their right to simply be children, free to learn, dream, and grow. And for Anne, each report card with good grades, each compliment from teachers, each proud smile on her daughters' faces was proof that with the right opportunities and support, her little buds were finally blooming in a garden of infinite possibilities. The office of Dr. Maria, the school psychologist, had colorful walls decorated with children's drawings and a large window letting in gentle morning light. Sophie and Claire, seated on comfortable beanbags, were in one of their weekly sessions. After 3 months of counseling, the changes were evident. "I had a nightmare last night," Sophie admitted, hugging a teddy bear. "But I didn't cry this time. I remembered what you taught me about breathing and thinking good thoughts." Claire squeezed her sister's hand in silent support. "I woke up when I felt her move up on the top bunk, and I told her a story so she could fall back asleep." Dr. Maria smiled kindly. "You two are learning to handle your fears very maturely. Sophie, would you like to talk more about the nightmare?" "It was about that night we had to run from the last place," Sophie answered, her voice more confident than it would have been a few months ago. "But now, I know we're safe." The twins' progress was evident not only in therapy, but in every aspect of their lives. At school, each was developing her own identity, though they still shared a special bond. Sophie had discovered a passion for science that amazed her teachers. During a science fair, her project on the water cycle received special recognition. "When we were homeless," she explained to her class, "I used to watch the clouds and rain all the time. Now I understand how it all works." Claire, meanwhile, poured her experiences into creativity. Her stories, once timid attempts to escape reality, now filled entire notebooks. "I write about people who help other people," she explained to her language teacher, "like Paul helped us." At the shelter, the changes were also visible. The girls no longer jumped at sudden noises or hid food under their pillows. They'd learned to trust that there would always be a next meal, a safe place to sleep. "Yesterday," Anne said, moved, at a meeting with the support team, "I found them teaching other kids at the shelter to read." Claire was telling a story she'd written, and Sophie was explaining the harder words. Paul Gumer, who made sure to follow the girls' development, noticed subtle but significant transformations. "They smile more easily now," he commented, "and not just that polite smile they used to have, but real smiles that reach their eyes." Art therapy sessions proved especially transformative. The twins' drawings, once dominated by dark tones and solitary figures, now burst with color and people. "This is our new room," Sophie explained, showing a vibrant drawing. "And here's Mom working, and Paul visiting, and Dr. Maria helping us. And here we are at school," Claire added, holding up her own piece. "I have friends now. Lots of friends." The bond between the twins, always strong, evolved from a fear-based dependency into a healthy connection founded on love and mutual support. Though they still preferred to be together, they began developing individual interests. "Claire's better at making friends," Sophie reflected during a session. "Before, that used to scare me. But now I know it's okay. She always comes back to tell me the cool stories she heard." "And Sophie is so brave with her science experiments," Claire added proudly. "She teaches me everything afterward, so it's like I'm brave too." Anne witnessed her daughters blossoming with a mix of pride and gratitude. During a special dinner Paul arranged to celebrate 3 months of progress, she shared her observations. Yesterday, for the first time since Robert died, the girls talked about their dad without crying. Sophie showed off her science fair award and said he would be proud. Claire read aloud a story she wrote about a dad who became a star in the sky. The tears in Anne's eyes were no longer from sorrow, but from hope fulfilled. Paul, quietly observing the transformation, was also moved. "What's incredible," he reflected, "is how they turned their pain into something positive." Sophie uses her experience to understand and explain the world, while Claire channels it into stories that help other children. The girls' personal growth even showed in their play. On the school playground, they were no longer the shy girls who stayed in the corners. Sophie organized scientific expeditions in the yard, collecting leaves and observing insects with her new friends, while Claire invented elaborate stories that her classmates loved acting out during recess. "You know what's really different now?" Claire asked during one of her sessions with Dr. Maria. "We don't worry about the future anymore." "That's true," Sophie agreed. "Before, all we thought about was surviving. Now we can dream." And the dreams of Sophie and Claire Stewart grew bigger by the day. Sophie spoke of becoming a scientist and discovering cures for diseases like the one that took her father. Claire dreamed of writing books that would help other kids overcome tough times. The personal growth of the twins was not just individual, it was a testament to the power of human resilience, a mother's unconditional love, and the difference proper support can make in a child's life. With every smile, every achievement, every step forward, Sophie and Claire proved that, with help and time, even the deepest traumas can turn into strength and wisdom. The reflection in the elevator doors at Matthews Industries showed a different Anne, dressed in an elegant business suit, hair neatly styled, posture straight. Still, as she rode up for her first day at work, memories of the past haunted her like persistent shadows. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, gripping the folder Paul had given her. Inside, besides the necessary documents, was a recent photo of the twins in their school uniforms, her new good luck charm. Thomas Anderson, supervisor of the finance department, was waiting for her on the 15th floor. His usually stern face softened at the sight of Anne's nerves. "Welcome to the team, Mrs. Stewart. Paul told me a lot about your knack for numbers." The first day was a whirlwind of emotions. Every spreadsheet and meeting brought flashbacks of her old life, when she had a promising career before Robert's illness. But now things were different. She had a support network. "Did you see how she sorted out that discrepancy in the accounts?" Thomas remarked at the end of the day. "She's got a special eye for detail." As the days passed, Anne rediscovered her passion for numbers. Ironically, her experiences managing scarce resources on the streets had sharpened her ability to spot inefficiencies and optimize resources. Thomas, known for his seriousness and distant professionalism, found himself increasingly invested in the Stewart's case. He started by offering Anne professional tips, then moved on to financial education advice, and before he knew it, he was helping the twins with their math homework. "You know," he confessed to Paul during a meeting, "I never imagined helping a family could be so rewarding. I always viewed numbers as just numbers, but Anne and her girls, they give a whole new meaning to my job." Paul watched with satisfaction as his decision to hire Anne triggered a transformation, not just for the Stewarts, but also in the corporate environment. Thomas, in particular, seemed to have found a new sense of purpose in his work. The biggest change, though, was apparent in Anne herself. The constant fear in her eyes was gradually replaced by determination. Her contributions in meetings became more confident, her analyses more assertive. "Mum smiles more now," Claire observed during a visit to the company's daycare, where the twins sometimes spent afternoons. "And it's not that sad smile she used to have," Sophie added, wise beyond her years. Thomas, watching the family interact during a shared lunch, felt something shift inside him. He began implementing departmental changes, setting up mentoring programs and opportunities for people in vulnerable situations. "You've transformed more than one family," Paul told Thomas. "You've transformed an entire corporate culture." Life for the Stewarts took on a new normal. Anne not only excelled at her job, but started teaching financial literacy classes at the shelter on a volunteer basis. The twins thrived at school, and nightmares of the past gave way to dreams for the future. "Yesterday, Sophie told me she wants to be a financial engineer," Anne said during a meeting with Paul and Thomas. "A few months ago, we couldn't even think about the next day." Thomas, who once saw numbers merely as profit tools, now recognized the human impact behind every financial decision. "Matthews Industries has a great scholarship program," he noted. "And I have a feeling we'll have two very special applicants in the future." The office, once just a workplace, had become a space of hope and renewal. Anne, who once feared she'd never have a normal life again, now led major projects and made plans for the future. "Sometimes it's still hard to believe," she confessed to Paul over coffee, "that we left that situation, that we're really rebuilding our lives." "You always had the potential," Paul replied. "You just needed the chance to shine again." And so, between spreadsheets and meetings, between reclaimed dreams and new objectives, the Stewart family continued on their path of overcoming hardship, proving that sometimes the greatest challenges can lead to the most beautiful transformations. Night was falling over Manhattan when Paul finally decided to share his secret. He was seated with Anne in the small garden of the shelter, watching Sophie and Claire play with other children. The sound of their laughter echoed in the air, stirring long-buried memories. "Do you know why I really decided to help you that day?" he asked gently, his eyes on the twins. Anne, who had wondered for a while about Paul's deep connection with her daughters, simply shook her head. "8 years ago, I also had a son," Paul began, his voice trembling. "Daniel. He was 5 years old, the same age the girls were when I found them." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of his revelation. Anne instinctively took Paul's hand, offering silent support. "Maria, my wife, and Daniel were my whole world," he continued. "One day, they were on their way back from a birthday party. A drunk driver." His voice failed. "I lost them both in an instant." The children's laughter in the background formed a painful contrast to the story unfolding before them. "For years, I threw myself into my work. I built an empire but came home every night to an empty house. Success in business felt like a cruel joke. I had everything money could buy, except what really mattered." Anne listened, her eyes filled with tears as she began to understand why Paul was so invested in her family. "When I saw Sophie and Claire on that sidewalk," he gave a sad smile, "it felt like fate was giving me a second chance. Not to replace Daniel, nothing could, but to honor his memory by helping other children." Sophie and Claire, sensing something different in the atmosphere, approached curiously. "Why are you crying, Paul?" Sophie asked, her big eyes full of concern. Paul discreetly wiped away a tear. "Sometimes we cry when we remember people we love very much, like we do when we remember Dad," Claire asked innocently. "Just like that," Paul answered softly. The twins, with a child's unique intuition, came closer, each taking one of Paul's hands. "You lost someone special too?" Sophie asked gently. Paul nodded, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to speak openly about Daniel. He told the girls how his son had loved dinosaurs, about the bedtime stories they'd read together, about Sunday mornings in the park with Maria. "Daniel would have loved meeting you," he smiled through tears. "He always wanted sisters." Claire, with her childlike wisdom, proclaimed, "Now you have us. We're not Daniel. But we can be your family too. Anne watched with a heavy heart, finally understanding why Paul always seemed to know exactly what her daughters needed. For years, Paul continued, I believed I'd lost the ability to connect with people, that I'd lost my chance to have a family. But you, he looked at the three Stewarts, you showed me that a heart can heal, that there's room for new love without diminishing the love we have for those we lost. Sophie and Claire spontaneously hugged Paul. We love you too, they said in unison. And in that moment, under Manhattan's starry sky, four hearts scarred by fate found solace in one another. Paul, who had hidden behind his wealth and success for so long, finally allowed his own wounds to begin healing. Maria always said there are no coincidences, he reflected, looking at the stars. Maybe she and Daniel guided me to you. Anne gently squeezed his hand. And maybe Robert guided my girls to you. The twins, tired but happy, nestled between the two adults, forming a picture that, though unconventional, was filled with love and hope. Family, Paul murmured, isn't always the one we're born into, but the one our hearts choose. And so, under the night sky, four lonely souls confirmed what they had known for some time, that sometimes the greatest losses can lead to the most meaningful encounters, and that love, in all its forms, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Paul gazed at the sunset through the massive windows of his Upper East Side mansion. The luxurious three-story space, once a monument to his loneliness, now felt even emptier after the past few weeks spent with the Stewarts. His eyes fell on a recent photo on his desk. Sophie and Claire smiling next to a science experiment they'd done together. The genuine happiness on their faces contrasted with the corporate photos that once dominated the room. James, he called to his driver and longtime confidant, I think I finally understand what's been missing here. The driver, who knew his employer's story well, smiled knowingly. The girls' laughter, sir. Life, Paul answered simply. This place needs life. The decision, though significant, felt natural, just the acknowledgement of something that had already taken shape. The next morning, Paul found Anne at work before business hours. Ms. Anne, he began, more nervous than he'd been in years. I'd like to make a proposal for you and the girls. Anne studied him curiously, noticing his unusual agitation. My house is far too large for just one person, he went on. And after everything we've been through together, after sharing my story about Daniel and Maria, I realized I don't want to live just with memories anymore. Anne's eyes widened as she started to see where this was going. I'd like to invite you and the girls to live with me. Not as a charity or a temporary arrangement, but as a family. Each of you would have your own space, your own room. The girls could go to school in the neighborhood, have a garden to play in. Anne was silent for a moment, tears forming in her eyes. Paul, are you sure? I've never been so sure of anything in my life, he replied firmly. That house needs joy. It needs life. And you deserve a permanent home. The news was shared with the twins that same afternoon, in the shelter's garden that had been their temporary home. Their reactions were immediate and moving. We're going to live in a real house, Sophie asked, her eyes shining. And with our own room, Claire chimed in, barely containing her excitement. With bedrooms, a garden, a library, and all the space you need to grow and dream, Paul confirmed, voice thick with emotion. The move was planned for the weekend. Paul insisted the girls help make decisions about decorating their rooms, turning the process into a thrilling adventure. Can I have a shelf full of books? Claire asked timidly. And can I have a little corner for experiments? Sophie added hopefully. You can have all that and more, Paul smiled. This will be your home too. Moving day dawned bright and sunny, as though the sky itself were celebrating. When the Stewart family arrived at the mansion, they were greeted by a surprise. Paul had decorated the entrance with balloons and a banner saying, "Welcome to our home." "This is magical," Sophie whispered, gazing at the spacious foyer. The house, once cold and impersonal, had been transformed. The girls' rooms were lovingly prepared. Sophie's included a small children's lab area and posters of famous scientists, while Claire's featured a mini library and a special spot for writing her stories. Anne had tears in her eyes at the sight of her own room, a stylish yet cozy space, complete with a desk to work at and a comfortable armchair for reading. "Now we can really be a family," Claire declared, spontaneously hugging Paul. "We already are a family," he responded, voice trembling. "Now we just have a place to call our own." That first night, they all shared dinner in the large dining room. The twins' laughter echoed through the corridors, filling every corner of the house with the life it had lacked. Paul watched with a heart overflowing. Finally, after so many years, his house felt like home again. "To our family," he proposed a toast with grape juice, prompting giggles from the girls. "To our new beginning," Anne added, her eyes shining with gratitude and hope. And so, under the roof of a mansion that had once held only memories of loss, a new family began its story, proving that sometimes destiny has surprising ways of healing broken hearts and bringing lonely souls together. 6 months had passed since moving into the mansion. The garden, once immaculately maintained but rarely enjoyed, now showed the cheerful signs of daily family life. Colorful toys, a small vegetable garden where Sophie conducted her botanical experiments, and an outdoor reading nook where Claire often penned her stories. Paul sat on a garden bench one Sunday afternoon, watching Anne help the girls with a science project. He smiled, realizing how radically his life had changed. Gone was the oppressive silence that once filled the house, replaced by laughter, lively conversations, and even the occasional family squabble. "Paul, come look," Sophie called out excitedly. "We found out why plants grow better with music." He joined them, his heart warming at how naturally the girls leaned against him, as if this had always been his place. "You know," Claire commented later, while they were setting the table for dinner that evening, "I wrote a story about our family." "What's it about?" Anne asked, placing the Sunday tradition, a tray of lasagna, on the table. "It's about how sometimes we have to lose something precious to find something equally special," she explained with wisdom beyond her age. "Like you and Dad Paul." The term Dad Paul, used spontaneously for the first time, made everyone pause. Paul felt tears in his eyes, while Sophie quickly added, "Yeah, our Dad Paul." Anne watched the scene through misty eyes, reflecting on how fate had turned her greatest tragedy into such a beautiful new start. That night, gathered in the living room, they celebrated not just their achievements but the completeness of this reassembled love. Photos of Daniel and Maria had a place of honor on the wall, alongside new memories with the Stewarts, a testimony to how love can expand without limits. "To our family," Paul toasted again, just as they had that first night, "and to all the dreams we'll still fulfill together." The twins smiled, snuggled between Paul and Anne on the couch, finally at home, not just physically, but in their hearts. They were living proof that love has the power to heal, transform, and create new beginnings, even in the most unlikely circumstances. And so ends a story that began on a busy Manhattan sidewalk, passed through McDonald's, shelters, and corporate offices, only to arrive at the most important destination, the place where hope, love, and family come together to show that no setback is final, and that every new morning brings with it the promise of a brighter future.